Okay, hello and welcome everybody to an event that's really become synonymous here at the Center for International Higher Education with the arrival of spring, and that is our joint webinar that we do every year around this time with the International Association of Universities. My name is Rebecca Schendel, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Managing Director of CIHE. And it's my distinct honor to welcome all of you today to today's joint webinar on the topic of virtual internationalization, which is a topic that is clearly of great interest to many around the world, given just the huge registration numbers we've had for this event. It's fantastic to see. For those of you who may be a little less familiar with CIHE, let me just give you a few words of introduction on our side. So the Center for International Higher Education was founded at Boston College, just outside Boston, Massachusetts, in 1995. And for the last 30 years, we've been working to promote the belief that an international perspective is vital and important for enlightened policies and practices in higher education. We do this through research, through education and academic programs, through open access publications, and also through public events such as this one. And since 2020, we have been organizing webinars on important topics in international higher education, many on our own, but also some in partnership, including this one. This joint webinar with IAU is one such initiative and one that has been really positive for both parties and one which we enjoy very much. We're spoiled today with a really excellent lineup of speakers, but before I turn the floor over to them, I wanted to invite my colleague Eilish van Land from the International Association of Universities to say a few words on behalf of the IAU.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, for these beautiful words. Very pleased to organize this spring webinar with you, as usual. This is a joint event that we very much cherish because we really go into much depth when it comes to analyzing what's happening to internationalization around the world. And today we're touching on a very particular point of the future of internationalization as well, how it moves online and what it means, where it was in the past more of a concept that was well defined, as something that was also kind of considered as a perhaps alternative or a crisis option to higher education. Today, it has become a real alternative to many of the issues we face when it comes to internationalization. It's really considered as a space for a lot of innovation. So we will be very pleased to hear from, as you say, the beautiful lineup of experts who will talk to these different points. Let me as well maybe introduce you very quickly to the International Association of Universities, which I have the honor to lead as Secretary General. My name is Eilish van Land, and I'm based in Paris, and that's from where we operate as an International Association of Universities. It's an international NGO that was called into life by UNESCO back in 1950. And brings together universities from all around the world to work together on key topics and issues that are on the minds of leadership everywhere around the world, and which cascades down into everything that a university does, and also is on the work tables of many researchers around the world. And so we concentrate on four specific dynamics in higher education. It's initially value-based leadership, and then we engage a lot of our work and efforts into higher education and research for sustainable development. We also work on the digital transformation of higher education, and the work here that will be discussed today kinds of forms part of that as well. And last but not least, we work on the future of internationalization of higher education. And there we are very pleased to always work very closely with CIHE and Boston College, because our mutual reinforcing dynamics actually allow to go the extra leg when it comes to developing new knowledge around where internationalization should lead. But we have many other experts with us today. I see many names of highly skilled people with a lot of knowledge to bring into the conversation when it comes to the future of internationalization. Let me please here highlight just one of the most recent achievements, and that is the IAU 6 Global Survey on Internationalization, which was launched just a few weeks ago. It's available online, open access for everybody to use and abuse of in your own work. And we will put the link to that also in the chat. And that as well connects us very closely to the work of CIHE and other projects that we run together. But Rebecca may say a bit more about that. The main author of the Global Survey report is Giorgio Marinoni, whom I'd like to already salute here for his excellent work, and you will hear more of him when he will lead the conversation and the Q&A after the brilliant presentations we're about to listen to. So thank you all for being with us. We're very pleased to see the many come to this virtual table, and I look forward to the conversation. So the floor is back to you, Rebecca.
Thank you very much, Elise. And now, without further ado, it is indeed time to turn to the topic of interest for today, that of virtual internationalization, a topic which clearly has been important for many years, particularly in the context of climate change and also global inequalities, which of course continue to prevent all but a very small elite minority of students from engaging in physical mobility programs, but which of course really jumped to the forefront of public consciousness during the COVID-19 pandemic. During the pandemic, we know that institutions around the world...
Oui, donc ça va bien pour Samuel. Oui, pas de café, sauf que comme il y a déjà eu...
Everybody, thank you.
You muted yourself.
You're muted.
Rebecca, we cannot hear you.
Rebecca, you are muted.
Indeed, I am. The rest of you are not. So the rest of you should be muted and I should not be. I apologize. So I was saying thank you very much, Elish. And now without further ado, it's time to turn to the topic of interest for today, that of virtual internationalization, a topic which clearly has been important for many years, particularly in the context of climate change, but also in the context of global inequalities, which continue to prevent all but a very small elite minority of students from engaging in physical mobility programs, but which of course really jumped to the forefront of public consciousness during the COVID-19 pandemic. During the pandemic, we know that institutions around the world really started to come to terms with what the concept of digital internationalization means, but there are questions as to whether this attention will be sustained or whether institutions will merely, or indeed have already, merely return to their previous modes of operation. So it's really timely to pause and take stock of where we are in the field, about what we know about digital internationalization, its limits and its possibilities, and also what the implications of different practices and processes might be. So as always with our joint webinars, our intention is to introduce the topic to you through a range of speakers, each of whom brings a different perspective on the issue. I'm going to briefly introduce the speakers now, just so they don't have to spend too much of their valuable time on their own introductions. And then I'll just share a few brief housekeeping announcements before we get started. So our first speaker today will be Laverne Samuels. Laverne is president of the International Virtual Exchange Consortium, president of the International Education Association of South Africa, and also director of international education and partnerships at Durban University of Technology in South Africa. Next, we will hear from Veronica Rodriguez Luna, vice president of the Red Latin America COIL, which is the Latin American COIL network. Veronica is also professor and COIL coordinator at the Universidad Veracruzana in Mexico. Keiko Ikeda is professor in the Division of International Affairs and vice director of the Institute of Innovative Global Education at Kansai University in Japan. And like Veronica, Keiko is also COIL coordinator at her university. And last but not least, my colleague Chris Glass is professor of the practice of higher education in the Lynch School of Education and Human Development here at Boston College, in addition to directing BC's new executive doctorate in higher education, and also working with us here at CIHE as an affiliated faculty member. Chris's scholarship is currently focused on questions related to digitization in higher education, including its internationalization. And if you haven't seen it already, you might be interested in Chris's recent book that came out earlier this year, Digital Internationalization in Higher Education, Beyond Virtual Exchange, which he co-edited with Melissa Watley and Taylor Woodman. So I hope you're as excited as I am to hear from this highly knowledgeable panel. Before we get started, though, just a few quick housekeeping announcements. This event is being recorded, and the recording will be shared on both the CIHE YouTube channel and also via the IAU. To help us with the recording, it would be very helpful if you could remain muted throughout the webinar. Not the speakers, though, as I just did. Speakers, you can go ahead and unmute, but the rest of you. And if you're not a presenter, we'd also appreciate it if you would keep your video off, just because that helps us to keep the spotlight on the speakers. Our speakers will each speak for approximately 10 minutes. We're not going to take time for questions and answers or in between. We do this so that we have a long period of time at the end of the session for interaction and also hopefully questions that can bridge and bring together the different presentations. But that can mean that it's easy to forget questions for the first speakers by the time we get to the end. So given that we use the chat for our questions and answers, we encourage you to pose your questions as soon as you think of them. You can go ahead and put your question in the chat, and Giorgio, who's going to be moderating the Q&A, will be taking note of them as you go. So don't wait to the end. There's no advantage to do so. As you have a question, go ahead and pose it. And as I say at the end, Giorgio Marinoni from the IOU will be moderating the Q&A, and he will select questions at that time. So don't be shy. So I think that's plenty of information from the top. Without further ado, I'm delighted to turn the floor over to our first speaker. So Laverne, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rebecca. And my apologies for my croaky voice. I've been struggling with a bout of cold, but I should be able to manage. So, colleagues, thank you very much for this invitation. It's my pleasure to be with you. I'm going to say good day because I know that we have people from different time zones. So I greet all of you from sunny South Africa. And it's my pleasure to talk to you about perspectives on virtual internationalization, particularly at a global level, particularly through the lens of IVEC, the International Virtual Exchange Consortium, but also to talk to you a little about the ecosystem that exists that bring different virtual internationalization bodies together in order to have impact. So firstly, I would like to say virtual internationalization has an edge over broader internationalization in that we have truly global bodies that oversee this type of internationalization. Internationalization bodies generally have been regional or have been national. You know, we think of IESA in South Africa, EAIE in Europe, NAFSA in North America, but there isn't a truly global body around internationalization generally. That is not the case in virtual internationalization. We have global bodies that actually contribute quite considerably to driving this form of internationalization. And the International Virtual Exchange Consortium is very much at the forefront of these efforts. It has emerged as a juncture, an important one for communities of practice in international virtual exchange. So I'm going to speak about the role of IVEC, these connected networks, and IVEC is a central point, networks and communities of practice that support universities, and some of the common challenges that exist across the regions and institutional types. So the Global Network for Virtual Exchange, IVEC, hosts the largest conference in this area. It's prominent. It draws an audience from over 60 countries, and it brings together instructors, administrators, instructional designers, and educational leaders from institutions from around the world interested in technology, international education, in new pedagogies, and how technology can be harnessed to drive internationalization to scale. I know there has been much talk about how COVID has driven this, but I would also like to stress that there was a strong core of institutions that were committed to this form of internationalization long before COVID. So let me give you some figures. The mainstay of internationalization prior to virtual exchange and COIL was physical mobilities. Europe, which has the best funded mobility program in the world, Erasmus, peaked at between 20 and 25% mobility. And we all know that Europe is a small continent. It can virtually be internationalized on a bicycle in a day. The figures in the US have been between 7 and 9%. And of course, after COVID, these have dropped significantly. In a continent like mine, Africa, those figures were 1% and under. So our commitment to virtual exchange and COIL has been a commitment to the other 99%, drawing in students and academics who would not have had access to internationalization. The consortium that we work with has tried to drive virtual exchange across the world into corners of the world that might not have engaged with this for this pedagogy. And out of it have also arisen new networks and new initiatives like the Emerging Voices Initiative, where we bring in voices that might be struggling to be heard in the world of virtual exchange, or where there are individuals striving to bring virtual exchange to their country or region. We've also had the Magic Makers community of practice that has emerged. The Emerging Voices group has had a standing panel at the annual conference of IVEC to discuss issues around establishing virtual exchange at these institutions that are struggling to make strides, as well as to regions that need support on their virtual exchange journey. Many institutions, I have to give credit here, started their COIL journeys through engagement with training through networks such as the SUNY COIL network, which predated IVEC. And through the SUNY COIL Center, practitioners were given access to discussion forums, webinars, special interest groups, and they highlighted issues like diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the social justice underpinnings and the epistemic justice underpinnings of a pedagogy like COIL and virtual exchange cannot be overstated. Really an important aspect of it. IVEC and the SUNY network continuously introduce practitioners to different types of networking opportunities, and an organization called COIL Connect, led by John Rubin, was established as an online platform for COIL partnering, and this platform has emerged and transformed into discussion forums on anything related to COIL, and COIL Connect has developed a growing network of partner organizations that support virtual exchange. The COIL Connect platform allows for universities, communities of practice, as well as regional COIL communities of practice to register their pages, allowing for practitioners to connect with each other. Recently, there has been a meeting between IVEC and one of our big funders, the Stevens Initiative. And of course, Stevens is a whole lot more than just a funding agency. They play a really important role in shaping the space around virtual exchange and COIL. And one of the themes that emerged was how we could take virtual exchange to a truly global level. While it has grown significantly over the COVID period and now in a post-COVID era, we still have much to do in taking COIL to different regions of the world, but also taking it to a truly global level. And that is a challenge that IVEC would like to take on in partnership with other organizations. I would also like to mention an organization such as Uni-Collaboration as a community of practice. It was launched by a small group of interested academics as a not-for-profit around the theme of telecollaboration in higher education at Trinity College in 2016. And it promotes training and research into virtual exchange and offers bespoke training for higher education practitioners. As part of this community of practice, practitioners have the opportunity to promote the development and integration of research and practice in telecollaboration and virtual exchange across disciplines. Uni-Collaboration aims to keep practitioners, researchers, policymakers, and management informed of this pedagogy as it evolves. So you can see from the diagram before you that while IVEC plays a big role in bringing together the community in this large and substantial conference each year, it is part of a broader ecosystem where other organizations play important roles in holding together this community and nourishing it so that it can prosper in its mandate. Through the interconnectedness of these organizations, support for institutional practitioners have advanced. It's allowed a number of universities to step into an arena where they might not have had the expertise, but now have developed that expertise and have become COIL experts in their own right. I'd like to move on to the next slide and talk a little about some of the regional efforts that have actually contributed and have supported the global efforts. I'd like to start off with LATAM COIL and BRAVE, the Latin American effort and the Brazilian effort that you will hear more about from my colleague Veronica, has actually made virtual exchange more accessible through networking events that go beyond the IVEC conference. While they have participated actively in the IVEC conference, they have also had regional events that have supported and driven international virtual exchange in their regions. The same can be said for JICE in Japan, and you will hear from Keiko a little later. The University of Monterrey, for example, and some of the universities in Colombia and Brazil that are part of LATAM COIL promote a COIL methodology in the Latin American region, a region which also had low levels of physical mobility. These regional networks have provided a community of practice that promotes communication between practitioners and institutions, as well as the practice and research of the COIL methodology. Using their common language, Spanish, in the LATAM community, it has actually resulted in exponential growth of virtual exchange in this region. Similarly, BRAVE is a far-by program in Brazil that encourages the implementation of virtual academic exchange amongst the associates of this Brazilian network. And again, there has been significant growth in this area. I'm going to speak a little about Africa before I close, and I'm going to be talking about an initiative called Encompassing All Voices. It is a community of practice that organically branched out of a number of Erasmus-funded projects, and with the aim of including voices and perspectives from across Africa, practitioners from my university, Durban University of Technology, with its partners at the Amsterdam University of Technology and Erasmus Hochschule in Brazil, have worked with Kenyatta University and Usmano University in Nigeria to drive COIL through the African continent. And lastly, I would be failing if I didn't mention the Ikudu project funded by Erasmus, that includes 5 South African and 5 European universities who for the last 5 years have worked together to drive collaborative online international learning and broader internationalization of the curriculum. And they have produced groups of staff that are highly trained and have become experts that are now driving virtual exchange at a global level. Just a few common challenges that I'd like to highlight. One is the lack of structural support for embedding international virtual exchange into universities at an institutional level and at a national level in some of the regions that I've not mentioned. And actually, in some aspect, in some regions, even at a continental level, the need for organizations to come together and coalesce is really important in providing this type of structural support. The digital divide is a huge factor that is impacting on fair and equal North-South partnerships, and of course, divergent global thinking around issues like diversity, equity, and inclusion also impact on us taking this form of internationalization forward. We have had many, many other challenges, and I am pretty certain that we will see many more. So we have achieved greatly in virtual exchange in the last few years, but the challenge goes on. So I'm going to end with a proverb that Nelson Mandela left with us, and it says, when you have climbed one great hill, as we have with virtual exchange in the last few years, we discover that there are many, many great hills to climb. And I think that this engagement today is about identifying some of those great hills that we need to climb together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laverne. I will now turn the floor over to Veronica. Veronica, are you ready?
Yes. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, depending on your time zone. Thank you very much for the invitation to this very interesting webinar. I'm so honored to share the floor with these virtual exchange experts in different regions. And well, I'm going to share some slides as well. And I'll take more time. I will start sharing my screen. And well, as you heard, I work at the Universidad Veracruzana in Mexico, and I have been the president of LATAM COIL for years now. Now have become the vice president, and I will tell you mainly about the experiences that we have with my institution, Universidad Veracruzana, working with Latin America, and some of the experiences that we have had also in LATAM COIL. And I will mention, first of all, that we use the term COIL, Collaborative Online International Learning, but you have heard also, for example, BRAVE, which is the Brazilian Virtual Exchange, or you can find Virtual Exchange. And we have learned that, for example, in some institutions, mainly in the United States, they use Virtual Exchange to refer to COIL. It means that they use the same methodology, the COIL methodology, but they don't call it COIL, they call it Virtual Exchange. Also, in some institutions, they call it Global Classroom. And again, we realize that the model is the SUNY model for global learning experience, online intercultural exchange, or as we said, BREAD. And in my institution and in some Mexican institutions that we work with, we also call it virtual international collaboration. At Universidad Veracruzana, we began doing COIL in 2016 because at that time, a great number of many public institutions. My institution is the fourth major institution in Mexico. So those institutions that have a great number of students and professors received an invitation from the U.S. Embassy to participate in a program that at that time that was called the USA-Mexico Multi-State COIL Program that was led by John Rubin and the SUNY COIL Center. At that time, 3 professors and the COIL coordinator took the COIL course orientation from the SUNY COIL Center, and then 2 professors took the Academy for COIL course development. And that's when they learned how to design a syllabus to do virtual exchange, because it's important to mention that we call virtual exchange, but there is a methodology. We need to design certain activities, we need to choose certain tools. It's not like just using the computer, using the technology and talk. No, we need to follow a methodology. That's why our professors received this Academy for COIL course development. And from February 2017, we started with the first 2 COIL courses at the Universidad Veracruzana. And from that time to January 2024, we have almost 200 COIL courses that we have registered. More than 200 faculty have been trained in COIL. We now have our own training program that we worked at the beginning with some materials that was facilitated by the SUNY COIL Center. We now have our training in Spanish and English and in French as well. And more than 3,000 students have been able to experience virtual exchange. And the subject areas or disciplines where there is more demand for partners from Mexico, and we have noticed that in Latin America as well, is the technical field. For example, those people who are in engineering, they are asking for partners doing virtual exchange. Also, the people who work in the economic field, humanities and social science, health sciences, biology and agriculture. In that order is that where we have found, at least in Mexico and in Latin America in general, where the COIL is being done the most. And then every time we do COIL at our institutions, we administer a survey, or we also do interviews. And these are some of the student reviews that I wanted to share with you that the students have said after they have done virtual exchange. Because as Laverne was saying, it's very important to hear the student voices. It's not always like the main leaders of the institution that are the ones who are running the programs and they are the ones who are supporting the programs. We need to hear the student voices and see if really the virtual exchange is working for them or not. And these are some of the Mexican voices that you will hear from the virtual exchange experience. And they have said, for example, I have enjoyed having a real audience reading my English writings. And this especially happens with students who are learning English as a foreign language. And they say that before they only had to imagine that they had a friend in the US or in Canada, and they had to just write to an imaginary person. And now they feel more connected because they are writing to real people. They also have said that this experience will allow them to express themselves in English on discipline-related topics because, you know, in Mexico and in Latin America, our main language is Spanish. And so this is an opportunity for students to express in English and to learn about their discipline in a foreign language. The third one, it's a very valuable review for us because the students, every time they do COIL, especially the ones who do COIL for the first time, they say, it's the first time I have interacted with someone from abroad. We know that this is true for students who are able to do physical mobility, but those students who don't have the opportunity to travel abroad now, through virtual exchange, they have been able to interact with someone from another country. And also, the next is important because they say, I have learned to take into account the opinions of individuals who grew up in a completely different cultural context than ours. And this is very important for the development of the intercultural competence. Also, the students have said that I have learned to set priorities because it's necessary to align working moments with the other person. And here, you know, when we talk about priorities, we also talk about critical thinking skills that also have been promoted by virtual exchange. And what has the faculty said? Well, some faculty members have said that the experience has been enriching because it involves intercultural and interdisciplinary exchange. Is also, when we talk about virtual exchange, and since it is very related to internationalization, we tend to talk more about these intercultural experiences. But also we know that virtual exchange also allows us to do interdisciplinary exchanges and to work among different disciplines. Faculty have also said students can appreciate and value the education they receive at a public state university. And this is true. When our Mexican students, for example, work with students from the US or Canada, and they compare the fees that they need to pay when they register for the university, and they realize that even if it is cheaper in a way in Mexico, in Latin America, they have this opportunity to do virtual exchange, and they really value what the education that are receiving and their institutions. The third one, COIL allows this opportunity not to be limited only to those individuals who have the economic resources, grade, language, or family situations that allow them to go out and travel. You know, these are requirements if you want to do physical mobility. But if you do virtual exchange, you just need to register in a course, be part of a course where the professor does COIL, and then you have the opportunity. You don't need to have the language levels unless it is in English or French. You don't need to have the money to buy a plane ticket and travel. You just need a computer or a cell phone. And then I want to share that the COIL that we have done in English language, you will see the difference that since we speak Spanish, we have done most COILs in Latin America, but we have also done COILs with Canada, you know, with one institution, the United States, Ireland, Hong Kong, and you can see at the right with Germany, we did the COIL in English, with Kazakhstan, also in English, India, Philippines, and South Africa. We have worked, by the way, we have done COIL with Laverne's institution. And that was in English, but since we speak Spanish, it's easier for us to work with our Latin American neighbors. And we have done more calls with Guatemala, Belize, Mexico, Peru, Brazil, Bolivia, Paraguay, Argentina with 3 institutions. We have worked also with Spain, Costa Rica, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, El Salvador, and Honduras. And well, I just, to conclude, I just want to say that COIL has given also the opportunity to do more South-South collaboration, to value all the diversity that we have in our South region, because, the history can tell that we used to value in a way more the northern route, because generally as COIL came from the north, many advancements have come from the north, but now we are really valuing, deeply valuing the diversity within our own region, and also valuing the language that we have. And well, thank you very much. These are our networks, and for Latin American Core Network, and these are also for the Universidad Veracruzana. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Veronica. Keiko, I will next turn the floor to you. Are you ready?
Alrighty, excuse me. Alrighty, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I am sharing my slides now. Okay, all right, I'll get started. Hi, everybody. Good evening, almost coming to the next day from Japan. I hope I'll be brief and then we can get to the discussion time now. So first of all, thank you so much for the intro. And I just wanted to share with you where I'm come from. I'm come from a university in Japan. It's a private institution right at Osaka. It's one of the big university, 30,000 student body scale private university. I run a center called IIGE since 2018, where we promote COIL and virtual exchange. And we have just launched a new initiative. Thank you, Levan, for introducing. It's a JIGE. I won't mention much about that, but if later on, if I have time to talk about it, I'll be happy to share with you what we do for the new initiative as well. The topic that I was asked to share with you today is the virtual internationalization in Asia. So I'm just going to go right into that topic in focus. So talk about virtual internationalization in Asia as a specific focus. Let's start with learning how a digital environment is like there in that region. So internet users in Asia, statistics just took that from one of the data. Compared to the pre-COVID, the user ratio has gone up, and probably the case of the rest of the world as well. And penetration of interest is very reliable now to steadily engage in virtual education modalities. This is an important factor to facilitate also to project the virtual internationalization in Asia with respect to higher educational institutions and context. Some of the new top players, as you can see in this slide here, are shown in recent years. Middle East, of course, but we also see the Central Asia and many ASEAN countries are showing in higher ratio of interest user now. In India, still slightly over 50%, leaving half of the population still behind the digital era, whereas, however, the top speed development is also happening in the same region. And Japan is the same. Although it is 82%, still feel there is a gap to fill, particularly in generation gaps and urban-rural gaps. While international platforms like Coursera, edX, those are things are popular, there are also regional platforms in Asia are existing and developing very rapidly, like in Indonesia X, Thai MOOC, Malaysia's Open Learning, which offer courses in local languages and then content tailored to regional interests. And in my talk, I'm going to assume virtual internationalization, or I'll call it VI because it's just long time to say, as the definition provided in the slide here. So VI is at the national, sector, institutional levels is defined as process of introducing an international, intercultural, a global dimension into the delivery, purpose, or functions of higher education with the help of ICT. Even that definition, there are several channels of VI that we can think of. Of course, COIL is one of them, but however, there are other modalities as well. And Asia seems to show developments in many of them. I'm only going to highlight some of them due to the time constraints in this talk, particularly, as you see on the list here, 1, collaborative education, 2, COIL or virtual exchange, and 3, global classroom. So now going to the regional highlighting here, highlighting Southeast Asia, for example. So ASEAN countries have worked on promoting COIL in the past few years. SHARE, this is an initiative, EU-funded Southeast International Cooperation Development Project that took place in 2021 to 2022 during the pandemic time. This has a lot of contribution to this development. Their educational roadmap, which was launched in 2023, has a digital transformation of education as one of the important pillars of actions, and they have highlighted COIL for it. From that initiative, ASEAN has had 1,686 students, generated 31 COIL or virtual exchange courses, and 397 faculty and international relation officers involved, embracing international collaborative learning through adaptation of this practice in just over 1 year, which is a remarkable results that they brought out. During the same period, they also worked very hard on promoting a digital credentialing structure, building for higher educational institutions in ASEAN as well. So digitally enhanced international education is going to be well accredited and acknowledged through micro-credentials, for example. The interest in micro-credentials in Asia reflects a broader global trend towards more modular and flexible learning pathways, which accelerates virtual internationalization process of this region. Promoting lifelong learning, upskilling to maintain economic competitiveness is the drive for that. Just to mention a few from the many parts of Asia, China has embraced the micro-credentials through platforms like Shuetan X and iCourse, which collaborate with the universities to offer a range of short courses. India has its own platform, which is supported by Indian Institute of Technology, offering many of the courses. Singapore has been the forefront for a long time in its lifelong learning ecosystem by doing its initiative called Skill Future Singapore. And South Korea and Japan are also incorporating micro-credentials into international education offerings to address the rapid changes in its employment landscape. And Japan, my country, has just taken a stab at this more formally with the micro-credential system now. This is certainly a COVID impact. So this digital credentialing infrastructure has a lot to do with the virtual internationalization, in my view, since each country can now connect with its own system and use common technology to generate credentials. Then we'll see a joint credential modules, teaching and learning together, cross borders, that can achievement being recognized globally now. In fact, an initiative that has been launched in 2022 in Japan has such a mission. Japan Virtual Campus, Japan's first international online educational portal, aims to liaison with the similar efforts in Asia Pacific. So the students in Southeast Asia, for example, will learn and earn credits from this and smoothly transfer into a university in Japan when they study abroad. Or in reverse, the Japanese students can start at the virtual campus, then transfer to study abroad for a higher degree in an overseas partner institution. All courses are EMI, English Mediated Instruction courses, and they're provided by the universities in Japan. So now I'm going back to the previous slides here. They mentioned that in Asia, various modes of virtual pedagogies are evolving and being a part of international education. These pedagogical affordances can could be the pushes the universities to move forward into a next phase with regards to what a university should offer to its students. In addition, with the cross-border border crossing and transcending online and on-site deviance for university curriculum, I believe we are facing now a need of unlearning and relearning the concept of internationalization of the universities. Virtual internationalization is indeed questioning the old-fashioned dichotomy. Just 10 years ago, two pillars of internationalization, at home and abroad or cross-border, were clearly understood and conceptualized. To some extent, these two pillars are still very, very critical categories. Yet, in addition to these pillars, the virtual modality which has come into the picture has indeed expanded what internationalization implies. Over 20 years ago already, these 2004, has said that dichotomy of international and domestic should be questioned once the ICT enters the scene. Use of ICT in education has a potential to redefine the concepts of international student and the international curriculum. And with the digital credentialing scheme becomes active, as I said today, then the education providers and receivers are now becoming even blurred in the boundaries. In this sense, all the students can now be considered as international students in terms of their virtual mobility. And distance and time need no longer to be barriers to international, and this is an incredible opportunity for education sector. Exposure and awareness for any student to encounter the world now becomes possible with access to a computer and the internet. And this has been mentioned already by the two speakers. Advanced technology is accelerating virtual internationalization too, for instance, generative AI. Blending virtual to physical on education and that provided by others overseas, these combinations are now easily considered and made possible. In this sense, virtual internationalization should not be considered separately from the rest of the internationalization endeavor. It is indeed, in my view, an integrated modality of internationalization. With that, I'll end my talk for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Keiko. All right, last but not least, Chris, can I turn it over to you?
All right, great. Hello, everyone. My remarks today explore the theme of the end of internationalization is just the beginning. 30 years ago, Neil Postman wrote that technological change is not additive, it is ecological. A new technology does not merely add something, it changes everything. Internationalization will not merely coexist with technology. I argue it will be dramatically altered by it. And not just international education, but international research and partnerships. The history of internationalization parallels an unprecedented period of hyperglobalization from the 1980s to the mid-2000s, a period that is unlike any other in world history. Brimmer has argued that we're moving from a geopolitics dominated by nation-state superpowers towards one with three conflicting world orders: a unipolar US-led security order, a multipolar economic order, and the wild card, a technopolar order where tech giants act as geopolitical actors. The shift towards multipolarity and internationalization is everywhere you look. Over the last 20 years, student mobility has diversified towards emerging regional hubs in Asia, Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East, as evidenced by a longitudinal network analysis by myself and Natalie Cruz of UNESCO data. International research collaborations, once dominated by a handful of Western nations, are now being regionalized with the rise of scientific powerhouses like China and the growing influence of non-Western middle powers such as India, Iran, and Brazil. And international partnerships are being affected by the decoupling of US and China ties and technologies, as well as the securitization of research partnerships, where creating new barriers and uncertainty for cross-border scientific collaboration. Now, while the geographic world order has become increasingly multipolar with diffuse centers of power, the technological world order has become ever more centralized under a handful of powerful tech giants. As argued in Cloud Empires, tech companies have become digital autocrats, wielding state-like control over our online lives. Just 1% of social networks account for 95% of social web traffic, 1% of search engines command 97% of all searches. Sam Altman went on a diplomatic mission after the release of ChatGPT, and Elon Musk makes decisions that impact the war in Ukraine and influence the policies of Javier Milei in Argentina. Global edtech investments across the world are 10 times or even 100 times of what they were 10 years ago. Now, each era of the internet has introduced new forms of internationalization. The early internet was novel because of its open protocols and decentralized structure. No one was in charge, and that was the point. As centralization concentrated power in the handful of tech giants, internationalization too became increasingly shaped by corporate influences, driven by income generation and rankings. DeWitt and others have aptly named this the end of internationalization, where internationalization has strayed from its ends and has become unmoored from its original principles and rationales. In his recent article, Everything That Quacks is Internationalization, DeWitt argues that internationalization is now a catch-all that serves only the interest of elite institutions. He argues that the predicament does not call for us to redefine internationalization, but for new directions for internationalization. The end of internationalization does not mean we're merely entering the next wave of internationalization as we have known it. Yes, traditional forms of internationalization will continue to exist, but the rocky cross-currents of a unipolar, multipolar, and technopolar world will forever shape it. And the technologies that will shape it, the future, will be more powerful than ever. The end of internationalization is just beginning. The future of internationalization lies in the convergence of three transformative technologies: artificial intelligence, blockchain networks, and extended reality. Each is transformative in its own right, but it is their combination that will be so powerful. Artificial intelligence is not a single technology. It is a system of transformative technologies, ranging from affective computing to computer vision. These technologies are so powerful that Nature named ChatGPT one of the top 10 most influential scientists of 2023. Nations are investing in AI to advance science. In 2018, the UAE appointed a cabinet-level minister of AI. The capabilities of large language models have accelerated and will only compound. As Ethan Mollick has observed, the AI you're using today is the worst AI you're ever going to use. The just released human-centered AI report at Stanford highlights examples of how AI is already being used to dramatically speed up international scientific discovery, from pharmaceuticals to renewable energy. Sentiment towards AI is highest in developing and emerging economies like China, Saudi Arabia, India, Peru, Malaysia, where the economic potential of the technology is transformative. Now, AI may make the headlines, but it's an extended reality where institutions are placing the greatest investments. Investments in XR are 3 times that of AI, and they're projected to be 5 times of what they are today. Now, think of XR technology as a metaverse, not as an alternate reality, but as a 3D version of the internet you already use, powered by AI. Digital twins will allow students in multiple remote regions to co-locate as they develop hands-on skills in immersive, interactive, and real-world environments. Decentralized blockchain networks are a powerful antidote to the centralizing forces of big tech. Blockchains are a new construction material for the internet, designed to re-decentralize the internet, one that is tamper-proof and transparent. Blockchains solve the most vexing problems of today's internet. Data rentership is a feature of big tech networks. Blockchain represents decentralized data ownership. Deepfakes are enabled by AI. Blockchain ensures authenticity. Now, if technology is ecological, not additive, what does the new global ed tech ecosystem look like? Kata Mineva and I at CIHE have been asking this exact question, mapping the emerging global ed tech landscape in our research project, Technologies of Mobility. And the breadth of the current landscape is already breathtaking. There are legacy 2.0 social networks that are building online communities and support services for international students, new AI-powered platforms that are offering personal career guidance, and AI-powered admissions and international student recruitment platforms that match students with institutions. There are blockchain solutions that are being developed for secure, verifiable credentialing, and XR technologies are being used to offer immersive global work experiences and creating new spaces for cross-cultural collaboration and exchange. Technology will not just be merely ecological. Technological change will be ecological, imperceptible in the moment, but dramatic over time. It will not just enhance current forms of internationalization, it will create new forms of internationalization that have been previously impossible or unimaginable. Our analysis suggests at least 4 new kinds of mobilities are being formed. New forms of enhanced physical mobility, new kinds of immersive virtual exchange, as we've discussed today, new forms of networked and hybrid mobilities, and the mobility of knowledge and skills. Now, everything depends on the lenses that we understand this new world through. Putting on these lenses helps us make a world that is invisible visible. We must view the future through both techno-optimism and pessimism to keep things in focus. There is an opportunity to expand access to virtual and hybrid mobilities, provide more secure credential recognition, and increase access education. But techno-optimism overlooks the commercialism and the geopolitical fragmentation that can further balkanize higher education. There are also the stark realities of the new digital divides that will be created, algorithmic biases, datafication, and surveillance. But techno-skepticism only perceives AI as a threat, and it ignores compelling evidence that it benefits the most marginalized learners, and it also removes the barriers of language where English is no longer the imperial tongue. We shed light on these dual realities in our book, Digital Internationalization. Summarized in our recent University World News article, Digital Internationalization needs to bridge, not widen divides. Historian and philosopher Yuval Noah Harari has argued it is a mistake to assume AI is like other past technologies because it's the first technology that can make decisions by itself, that can create new ideas and realities by itself, and learn to develop by itself. We cannot assume the future will be like the past. David Otter at MIT, one of the world's leading labor economists, has published extensively on the labor impacts of technological change and the economic inequalities that are created by computer technology. But he has argued that AI is a fundamentally different kind of technology, one that has the potential to actually bridge those divides and rebuild the hollowed out middle class. Now, it may be the end of internationalization, but we are not in a post-internationalization world. We're going to be in a world of multi-internationalizations, one that is shaped by unipolar, multipolar, and technopolar worlds. There'll be a unipolar securitization where our geopolitical barriers to student mobility and battles for tech supremacy will affect student visas and international research partnerships. There's going to be a multipolar economic order created with new interregional mobility and distributed education models, especially in the Asian Pacific and other emerging economies, fueled by growth by educational technologies in China, India, Israel, UAE, Nigeria, South Africa, Chile, Brazil, leading to the rise of new kinds of education hubs, and a technopolar wildcard, where technology companies may partner with elite institutions and leverage economies of scale that put some universities out of business, and decentralized tech platforms might offer a serious and secure, affordable alternative to many universities. Now, while the exact direction of this is unpredictable, one thing is clear. The end of internationalization is just the beginning. It presents an opportunity to create the internationalization we want, not the one we've inherited. What new forms of internationalization can we bring into being?
Thank you so much, Chris. And thank you so much to all of you for really interesting, thought-provoking presentations. I know we're already starting to get a lot of questions coming through the chat, so you'll have plenty of fodder to work with, Giorgio. But what I will do before I turn the floor over to you is abuse my position as chair in order to try and bring these 4 presentations together. I think when we listen to 4 presentations in a row, sometimes it's easy to forget the different bits that have come in, especially given the vision you just outlined, Chris. I'm sure a lot of people got a little stuck on that, but just as a reminder, as we work back, we've heard about two regional perspectives. We've heard a little bit about the various efforts happening in Latin America through Veronica's presentation, thinking about the importance of valuing regional diversity, valuing common language other than English, and the work that's already happening in that space. We heard from Keiko in terms of how things are working in Asia. I'm really glad, Keiko, you brought in the data around the differences in terms of just internet access at all, never mind different interests in different parts of the world, whether that's for micro-credential or for language learning or other things that we see different modes in different parts of the world. And to go all the way back to Laverne's presentation, who brought in the human element and the importance of networking, and also reminded us of the fact that there have been networks around for quite a long time. This is not new information for those who've worked at the forefront of virtual internationalization. However, I think what Chris just brought into the mix is something new. So I guess my question for all of you that hopefully will kick us off in terms of the interactive part of the discussion. Often we hear, certainly within universities, we hear sort of a preoccupation with, well, how do we get faculty interested in COIL, or how do we get individual people working in classrooms interested in digital internationalization? I think the vision that Chris just outlined is a lot bigger than that. And we know that universities are sometimes a little behind the times in sort of figuring out how much something is going to impact them. So I'm interested in, from each of your perspective, and maybe we can come to you last, Chris, but if we could go to Veronica, Keiko, and Laverne first, speaking from different regional parts of the world, to what extent do you think universities are thinking about this next wave of technology when it comes to digital internationalization? Is it even on the table? And if it's not, should it be, and how do we get it there? happy for
So-
any of you to jump in first. Go.
Rebecca, perhaps I'll start off with that. I think firstly, getting people interested in virtual exchange and COIL is a difficult question, because I don't think everyone can be engaged in the same form of internationalization. There are so many forms of internationalization that are available, and I think Chris's presentation highlighted the creative possibilities. So I think we have to look at best fit and who can do what in our broader internationalization efforts. It should be a cohesive effort ultimately, but it doesn't mean that everyone does the same thing. If there's a professor, for example, who is internationalizing through research, then that's fine. That professor should not be encouraged or forced to get involved in another form of internationalization. In terms of the technologies, the blunt answer is not enough engagement. Universities are not focusing sufficiently. I think there's been a recent focus on AI, but I think listening to Chris's presentation, our AI is just part of a far bigger range of evolutionary trends in technology. I think universities ought to do a whole lot more. I've noticed that some universities have clustered their efforts in small consortia dealing with AI, for example. But I think generally not enough is being done in engaging with the technologies that are available and how they can be harnessed for the academic project.
Thank you, Laverne.
I would like to say something just to add to what Laverne have just said, that it's very important to take into account the regions, because if you think about, I will talk about the Latin American perspective, there are certain institutions where professors, what they want is to have the experience. It's like I want to do virtual exchange because I want to have this experience, and my students have the experience, even if I don't have a certificate. But there are some faculty members who say, well, I need a certificate. If I don't have it, if it doesn't help me to get my tenure, for example, then I will not participate. That's another situation. And there are other faculty members that they say, well, I'm going to start doing virtual exchange because it will help me to get data for my research, and then I want to present and publish. So as Laverne said, every institution needs to do a needs analysis and explore what the faculty needs and what the context of the institution is. And talking about artificial intelligence, I related to one of the questions that I was asked in the chat. It will surely help us, especially with translation. They asked me there, I'm going to answer now, if we have done COIL with indigenous groups. Yes, we have done COIL with regulations with one indigenous group from Mexico. English was their language. It was before the pandemic, so the artificial intelligence was not so popular, and we used some translators. But still, it was difficult. Now, I think first, as faculty members and as authorities, as leaders, we need to learn more about artificial intelligence and the ethics, because some of our students are starting to use artificial intelligence, but not in the way we want to. So I think this is a new field, as you have mentioned, and that we need to learn more about. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica. Keiko, do you have anything to add on it?
Yeah, it's definitely on the table, and depends on who you talk to, the administration level and the people who are more focused on graduate attributes kind of issues, arguments when we talk about it. What do we want to make sure the students actually get out of the university as, and some of the skills and technologies that we can actually provide them opportunities and train them. But by the time they get out to the world, and probably the new technology and advancement is going to be coming out to them, and they have the challenge of unlearn again. So this rapid changes are pretty much the reality. So then how are we going to keep making sure that they are future ready? This is a discussion we talk about all the time. It's more of, what is it that this technology out there right now, and then do they know or not? It's more of a beyond that scope of understanding. It's more of how do we make sure our students are feel confident regardless of the changes in development that comes forward, that they are actually able to learn on their own or pick up the skills that they need or reach out to the people they need a resource from so that they have the core skills. So that comes all to not just the technology skills, but also more of a soft core skills, all this human skills that actually making them even stronger and standing in this rapidly changing world. So those are the arguments that we talk about. And then that really brings us, what is it the university actually need to bring and to make sure actually that the education actually assures in the curriculum. Those are the discussions we talk about all the time because of the fact that AI is getting all over the discussions because of the technology advancing so fast.
Thank you, Keiko. Chris, do you have anything to add on this, or?
I think the only thing I would add is that the work of the International Association of Universities on digital transformation is so important because it will look at in different contexts. I would highlight that just like we have aging infrastructure in terms of our building, investments in digital infrastructure are important, but they're also sources of new digital divides. And it will be really important, I think, to continue to have these international conversation because I think new forms of digital divides, I think was a question raised up, could be raised. I would highlight at the same time, the AI that's sitting in my hand is the same that's sitting in the hand of the President of the United States. I have access to the same technology as one of the most powerful people in the world, which is incredibly empowering, I think, to students and the ability to create new forms of cross-border mobility. I think particularly in terms of live translation and other things like that. Even today, as we think about Zoom captioning, we're having to choose between English and Spanish. And we're not that far away from a world in which that kind of real-time translation is taking place through kind of language models that allow this to be a truly kind of multilingual experience and removes English as a kind of a barrier to access to engage in these conversations.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you for bringing it back into our very own space today. It's true. I now need to turn over the floor to my colleague, Giorgio Marinoni from IAU. Giorgio is going to moderate the rest of the Q&A. Giorgio, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rebecca. So we had already some questions coming up in the chat, but I invite others because I think we have time to address at least a couple of them. So there were different questions which are rotating around the same theme, and I would like to group them in basically just one question, which is the question of inequalities in virtual internationalization. Some questions were focusing on inequalities due to access to technologies that allow virtual internationalization, where other questions were more focusing on political relationship between countries, for instance, that will hinder collaboration. Do you have any comments on this inequality and how it could be overcome this inequality in access and use of virtual internationalization? Please, whoever wants to start and want to start replying to this question is welcome.
So let me have a first shot at it. I think the digital divide is particularly prominent in regions like Africa. It's a digital divide that is around bandwidth that is available, the cost of Wi-Fi, access to devices, stability of provision, as well as the ability of universities to harness the technologies that are needed by a partner university. So we have found that this is the case in many parts of Africa, but I would also like to say that we've not found it an insurmountable challenge. We've been able to find ways around it. We've moved, for example, to asynchronous modalities. We've moved to platforms that are low bandwidth in demand. We found ways around it. So yes, there is the digital divide. It is a real problem. The cost, particularly in Africa, is exorbitant. It's 10 to 20 times the cost of Wi-Fi in Europe, for example. But I don't think that should be an excuse for not engaging. We certainly, through the projects that we have been involved in Africa, encompassing all voices, emerging voices, we've been able to find ways around it. And I think it's a challenge we must all take up in not just looking at high-tech technologies and embracing them readily, but also accessible technologies that can bring us together. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to.
Anybody else would like to comment on this point? Veronica?
Yes, I would like to be very brief because I would like to mention that at least for Latin America, the Latin COIL network has been key to have access to the virtual exchange. How? Because, well, as I mentioned in my presentation, the first institutions that we know of in Latin America that learned about virtual exchange, that was through COIL, we received the training in English, and only those professors who were able to understand English were the ones who were trained. So through the Latin COIL network, with the help of my institution, what we did was to do translations of the training. We started doing the trainings in Spanish, and we have worked with many different Latin American institutions in these trainings in our own language. And it is regarding, well, the language barrier that I emphasize a lot because in Latin America, well, that's the main problem. And also we have regarding the digitalization, well, as Laura mentioned, what we do is to have mainly asynchronous sessions when students don't have access, or when we have done, as I mentioned, also COIL with indigenous people. There are some students who don't have any access at their communities, and what they do is like they go to a town that is near the community where there is access to internet connectivity, and they do the work there, and they go back to their community. So what we do is to give them like enough time for them to do their work. But because, as I said, they have to move to another town to be able to connect into internet. And also, well, regarding for example, the conference that we have, which we think is unique because we're doing 100% online, so that the people who can't not travel, well, they can connect to the conference. And also we accept presentations in English, in Spanish, and in Portuguese, because, you know, Brazil is also part of Latin America, and we need to give them access to the language. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica. Chris, do you want also to add something on this point?
I would briefly add, with the digital divide, it's definitely access to technology, but it's also the adoption and application of that technology by professors in their research and teaching. But that requires universities to be able to invest in that, which also creates a further digital divide, because some universities have the capacities and resources to allow faculty to be on a learning curve that's necessary for these technologies, where other universities do not. And it's a good example, again, where technology isn't always a solution. It can exacerbate certain kinds of divides, because even if you put the right technologies in the hands of people, if they know how to use those in their classrooms or in their research, they won't be able to make the kind of change that supposedly these technologies bring.
Thank you, Chris. So maybe I will probably give back the floor to you, because the second question, which of course is open to everybody, but maybe you already mentioned this in your presentation. That's why I'm pointing at you to start with a response to this question. It's about the connection between virtual internationalization and more traditional ways of internationalization, like mobility, for instance. And the question is basically asking if you think that new virtual internationalization models will hinder old, let's say, traditional mobility model of internationalization or not. Basically, that's the question.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't put it as a dichotomy. So I don't, just like we don't want to dichotomize and think that AI replaces human work. The idea that it reconfigures what we do is I think, a reality. And what I'd highlight is traditional forms of mobility are already being impacted without these technologies, simply because of geopolitical conflicts and various kind of trade wars, economic interests as well. And so the idea that the traditional forms of mobility will always exist, and they'll continue to exist, but they will likely exist in different forms. And my argument is in part because globalization exists in a different form than it did today. Also, a multipolar world is good news for the world. It means there's more higher education capacity in different parts of the world. It's not centralized around Western powers. That's something to celebrate, and that's something that will continue. But digital internationalization provides it will introduce not just ways that we can think about replicating things like study abroad and exchange through forms of virtual exchange, international collaboration. I'm highlighting with examples of things like digital twinning. It allows hybrid kind of remote mobilities for people that are in remote locations to co-locate in a single place to engage in immersive experiences. Those are things that we are just beginning to think of and are coming on the horizon, and I think are important for people in the field to be looking forward to. And the reason I highlight this is if you look at companies like Amazon, they're already doing this. They have people that are employed in different countries that are working in the same location through immersive environments. So what's happening at Amazon will eventually come to our universities, and we can be thinking forward looking as we think about virtual internationalization, about the possibilities that creates, not ignoring also the new kinds of divides it introduces.
Thank you, Chris, for your clear answer to this question. Any one of the other panelists would like to add something on this point?
Yeah, I really definitely align the thought there. In the last part of the presentation I talked about is this virtual internationalization should not be just think separately from the general internationalization. And it's definitely just exactly the same argument. Even with the study abroad, for just take an example, we can't do the study abroad without a technology anymore. And we enrich the learning by enhancing and applying a technology throughout the experiences that they go off and get immersive experience. And then reverse could be possible too. So what we do is blend it now. With after the COVID, we're now fortunate to have options. We can increase, blend it in a physical part or online part, and then to what portion you wanted to mix the on-site part and the online part is up to the student decision, also the curriculum decisions. So you got more options to enrich the student learning now and in educational methodologies. So I think we should embrace that opportunities even more now.
Thank you, Keiko. So I see that there is just like a new question coming up. So again, it's a question more focused on research collaboration here. So it's asking about example of research collaboration through virtual internationalization. And the second part of the question is also asking if you think it's related to the inequality question before, if you think that this type of virtual collaboration in research could help incorporate voices which were excluded before in the scientific debate. Who wants to start with this one?
I'll share some initial thoughts and then invite other colleagues. I think what I try to bring to the table in this discussion is the idea to think about both the curricular aspects of virtual internationalization, but also how it affects our research functions. But if we think about research as essentially faculty that are just learning, for a lifetime and then producing research, we can see many of the applications. I mean, truly, as Laverne was talking, I've been so impressed with Ivex's work, and I've asked myself, are there similar forms of COIL for research? And I'm sure there have to be. I just don't know what they are. I already know that with new kinds of the kind of Oculus headset or the Apple Vision Pro headset, the idea that we engage in forms of telecollaboration where we're seeing the people we're working with in much more lifelike kind of interaction are already happening, and people are using those in research collaborations. But it's a fascinating question.
Thank you, Chris. Anyone else wants to share some perspective on this question?
Giorgio, I'll come in on this one. I think the use of virtual exchange is already contributing to research. I know at my university, we've taken virtual exchange into the postgraduate arena using cohort systems, bringing people together that are working in similar fields, whose collaboration can push the boundaries of research for each other. And I think these types of engagement will actually move us towards a very creative space in virtual exchange, a space that is not going to be defined strictly by what happens in an undergraduate or a classroom. It's going to actually be about types of engagement that actually straddle many of the activities at the university, including the core academic project, of teaching and learning and research. So I think harnessing the technology for this is important. I read a comment in the chat about a technocratic approach in some countries, and I would really guard against this technocratic approach where we are chasing after technology innovation and looking at that as what drives virtual exchange. Virtual exchange should be driven by the pedagogy. It should actually be driven by a want and a need for the transformative aspect of internationalization to be at the forefront of it. It should be a contribution to the broader human project. It should also be about us democratizing internationalization and international education and making it more inclusive. And lastly, it should be also accessible to us to address the grand global challenges that we need to address collectively. So if I were to look at the research around these grand global challenges, the UN SDGs, for example, I think technology will play a very, very important role in bringing researchers together from parts of the world that previously didn't have the opportunity to engage. It's no longer about necessarily meeting at a conference to be able to collaborate. So I see huge scope for virtual exchange to transform and evolve into something far bigger and far greater than what happens within a classroom.
Thank you very much, Laverne. I ask the other panelists if they still want to intervene on this point. Otherwise, looking at the time, I think there is no time for another question. So if nobody of you wants to intervene again, I think it's time to move towards the final remarks and the closure of the webinar. But before, any last comment from any of you? No, okay. I would like to thank you very much, all of you, and also our participants for posing very interesting questions. And now it's my pleasure to give back the floor to Hillige van Blant, our Secretary General, for some final remarks from her side, and then to Rebecca for also some final remarks to this webinar from CIG side.
Thank you very much, Giorgio. Thank you to the 4 excellent speakers with so many different approaches and viewpoints on what virtual exchange can actually mean in different settings and can actually offer, despite the many challenges that also have been listed in particular also by you, Laverne, with the Wi-Fi, the connectivity, the technology availability, the cost, or and what Veronica, you said, the language issue and the diversity of approaches, then also the time zone issues if we want to connect people properly, not only for internationalization as such and bringing the different the multi-perspectivity within the classroom. How far can we go when we know that we cannot have classes that start at 3 in the morning or at midnight for others? So how to connect people in a way that is really conducive to new kinds of dialogues, because I think you're right, and I fully agree, Laverne, when it comes to research collaboration, never have we seen the opportunities opening up like during the pandemic, where all of a sudden many things were open access, available to the many connections that we would have never been able to make if not online. So this virtual space comes with many different opportunities, yet also with still some challenges as well. I much liked your very thought-provoking presentation also, Chris, where you predict the end of internationalization internationalization as being a beginning for something new. How can we actually rethink internationalization, taking all these different appreciations of what internationalization could mean for the future? Will be fascinating. I think in the next webinar, we definitely will need to have the professors in the speaking role to hear from them how they actually engage with the opportunities that are out there. You alluded to some, those who engage, those who don't, those who can, those who cannot, those who have the opportunities to be upskilled, reskilled, led into a new era of internationalization. And the students, how do they see this? Because there are many different forms and shapes of impacts on the student community as well. Those who say, well, be careful, don't only push us in the virtual space, because we also want to experience the study abroad opportunity that comes with the mobility from one space to the next, because it remains a totally different experience. And so it's interesting as well how things can actually complement each other, bring in new approaches, open up opportunities for those who would have never traveled anywhere, yet still coming with one of the topics that was also alluded to. This is this multipolar world. How can we access it? How can we understand it? Is a virtual contact connection enough? Are we really able to get out of our comfort zone and understand the other by getting an introduction while online? This is kind of an appetizer sometimes, but it can be a full meal for those who have had the opportunity to benefit from an opportunity to go abroad for real, even from one state to the next in the US, or from one country to the next in Latin America, or one country to the next in Africa or in Asia, or across continents, but really to get out of what you know, because that's what we will need if we want to find new solutions to what we face. So this virtual space comes with many, many different opportunities for moving us into the future. And I believe with all of you speakers and the questions and the comments we saw in the chat, that we're only at the beginning of seeing where this can all help us head into the future. The video recording will be made available. You said it, Rebecca, at the beginning. It will form part on our side, on the IAU side. It forms part of a long series of webinar recordings that form part of the webinar series on the future of higher education. We have now almost 75 webinars out there, and with the help of Meg Harris, who's also listening in, our comms person, we will also have new AI-assisted search opportunities for these webinars to actually come into streams, so that the people with us today will be able to also navigate the video series in a creative way, and look at internationalization in all its full breadth and the new opportunities it brings. VouWBY has been mentioned a few times, and I'm very pleased to mention that I've been invited to speak at least 4 times at VouWBY to come in different forms and shapes and sessions. And we also will organize a president's session on the future of internationalization. And I will bring this discussion actually to the President's Day at VouWBY, together with Laverne, who's also going to be there, and other participants here. So another opportunity to connect also the BRAVE projects and other initiatives. And I think that this conversation is really part of a long research on what another very important question that you asked, Keiko. What is a university actually meant to be in the future, and what does a university want to offer students? Is technology a real opportunity? What are the spaces still to acquire the soft skills that we need to navigate it properly? So I think all these questions, we probably need to go back to bits and pieces of this webinar to listen in again to the many very good presentations that were made and good food for thought. So thank you very much. And now I turn the floor to you, Rebecca, to close this beautiful webinar.
Thank you so much, Elish, and thank you really to all of our, to Giorgio and to our excellent speakers, as well as to all of you who have attended and asked such insightful questions. As Elish said, we will certainly be circulating the recording after the fact once it's available. We also will add you to the CIHU mailing list so that you can be aware of other events and publications and other things that are coming on stream. But for now, I think it's just on me to thank you so much once again for joining us, to wish you all the best for the remainder of your day, evening, wherever you might be in the world, and to say see you next time. Goodbye.